Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm David Yehle with Acceldata, and we're partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Drew Smith, the Chief Data Officer of Little Caesars Enterprises and IIitch Companies. Drew, welcome to the interview series. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks. It's good to be here.
If you could talk, though, about whether it's a past life or in the infancy of your new career here, what are some of the key KPIs that you do look at, and how do you sample that data to basically assess a baseline, and then from there maybe set a direction for improvement?
And by KPIs, do you mean like KPIs for the data team and the data that they're using, or do you mean KPIs on the business side?
It's funny. I'd like to drift into both, right? Because
okay,
if you're not growing the revenue, if you're not growing the franchisee count, you're not growing the store growth, you're not going to, the data that you manage is not going to matter. But I think there's both. There's the critical board level KPI of share of bag, in-store sales, franchisee growth. Love to hear your comments on that and how your data strategy feeds into those bigger KPIs.
Okay. Sure. So, like most companies, we have some goals, short, mid, long term. I got to be careful. I won't talk about those, but they could be pretty understandable in our business, right? So what's our menu mix? What's our channel mix? What's our whatever, right? And we've got specific targets on that. And then when I look at those targets, I think rightfully, they're set based on market need or market demands, customer demands, opportunities to take share from competitors for whatever reason we believe that to be the case. Some analysis is done to make it that case. But they aren't really yet based on, and that data sits in our system. So what we do often is we look at things that we can actually add to our POS system because we built our own. Mm-hmm. And we look for like you said, the external or third-party data that might help us deepen our understanding. Mm-hmm. And our job as data professionals to go is, I know you've set a target for that. And I know that we can measure it at least to the baseline, use that term baseline, right? But if we want to get even smarter, if we want to, understand more deeply whether or not our digital penetration in a given market is not only on par with our global digital penetration, because that could be an apples to orange, or whether it's on par with the area, what other figures could we look at? Here I'm making things up, to be honest with you, but it's still conceptually correct, right? So could we rely on our partners at Google for the amount of people that are doing, restaurant reviews? Could you get data scientists who can sort of say, yeah, but more data would be good, and the type of data we need could supplement our understanding of of how we should set that target. How digital should we be? In which market should we be more digital? Those types of questions are really important for data people to get involved in, because the data in our system anyway doesn't yet exist. We'll have to create it or we'll have to buy it. Yeah. And I think that's really a really huge value that many data teams don't get the chance to contribute to, and I'm excited to contribute to that. So that's sort of data on the business side and the metrics and the KPIs. So we look at the KPIs. Some of them are traditional, some of them are newer, but we always ask, if we had more data, could we have more depth of understanding on these KPIs? And in particular, when you have as many restaurants spread around the world, we talked about the different global perspective. How can you increase that? Because you don't move a global organization by moving a global organization. You move a global organization by selling more in LA, selling more in Miami, selling more in Santiago, and selling more in, Barcelona, Spain. That's how you move a global organization. So that understanding we need to help with. And then KPIs for our data team. Really, for us, we have a couple of KPIs. So firstly, we have a pretty big roadmap in the data warehouse team that they've built before, and we're starting to kind of feed into that. And the key thing for us is that we increase data accessibility, which we can track through several different ways. Because if you want to, again, use that word I'm not so comfortable with, data-driven. If you want to use a word I'm even less comfortable with, use data democracy, then you need to increase data access. But you only would increase data access once you've improved the data quality and the data structure. So again, back to data governance, But so we do try to track our data accessibility. We also are quite early in our stages, but quite energetic around measuring actually the utilization of reporting and KPIs. Again, as an organization whose tough work is done oftentimes in one unit on one day by one manager. If we think we're creating a report that's great for them and they never open it, we failed. I can take the assumption that they're doing the right thing for their business. So we also measure participation or utilization in BI and reporting tools. And then for the advanced analytics thing, there's a couple of problems which we have termed eternal problems that we have long-term goals to solve. Can't get into too much detail of those, but most companies have those, right? So an example would be, we need to increase our amount of unknown customers in markets, like I mentioned, South America and others, where it's difficult to get more known customers. So we have set out some targets where data scientists can get creative and figure that out. So we measure a metric there. So you've got metrics in data use and accessibility. You've got metrics on performance reporting.
True. And if I could go back to, I really like that notion.
There's a long prattle, so sorry.
No, that was great. You're absolutely right. It's like you build these great reports, but if no one is using them, no one is viewing them, and no one is actioning off of them, how good is it? Obviously, it's not that good. But what other, are new time constraints being put on you? Like things that used to be a weekly report now is expected to be daily. Items that were daily is now expected to be hourly. Anything you can comment on there from a speed with which the data needs to flow? And then secondarily, could you just talk about, the richness of the reports? Like, are people ready for that yet in your organization, or were they ready for it at IKEA?
Sure. So we've got richness and clock speed. I'm just going to break that down so I can remember your good questions. So let's take the clock speed one. We are, I think, beginning to swing the pendulum from batch to real time, and I think that pendulum will find its way in the happy middle. Okay. And what I mean by that is we have started, and I really credit our chief operating officer for this, because she's responsible for the stores writ large, and so she's really great bridge between the strategic long-term brand building and the daily operations of the store. And her relentless statement is, how often are we going to act on the decision? Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. So it's really important to manage your labor costs in a restaurant, right? And you can easily think, I should have real-time information on my labor spend as compared to my sales so I can get an idea of my productivity. But it gets more complicated when you think there's things you have to do to make sure that the health and safety of the business is taken care of. There's obligations you have both legally and morally to your coworkers in terms of the hours you said you've given them. So there's a few more constraints. And the reality is you don't act on that on a minute-by-minute basis. So we started discussing, when will we act on that? So we came up to a time frame that was neither batch nor real time, but based on the pragmatic experience of how thousands of restaurant managers find themselves, as they have for decades, with lulls in their business when that's the time they think about it. They think about it in between the lunch and the dinner break. Yeah. That's the time they're going to act on it. So for me, one of the things is our clock speed, generally speaking, is being expected to go up. But what we're trying to do is set the data clock speed to the decision clock speed. Instead of saying just because you can have it in real time, you should. Yeah, sounds pretty common sense, but I mean, it took the energy of that COO for her to sort of say, no, I want to do the right thing by the company across all dimensions.
Very interesting perspective.
And then from a richness point of view, I think we are early here in the Little Caesars enterprise, so people are really interested in more and more and more. So we haven't reached that point of saturation, but I have in previous companies reached that point of saturation. I have reached that point where, because the usability and the quality of tools like Tableau and Click and others, those are just a couple that I have good experience with, as well as Power BI, that become really easy to use, and they're really good. And if you build your data infrastructure, as I mentioned, to have high accessibility with the right security guards, my goodness, anybody could build a lot really easily, but that doesn't necessarily mean the business is going to improve. So I've been in situations where you take a look back and you can have 15, 20, 35 versions of the same thing. And this is no revelation. Everybody has had this since the dawn of BI, right? But one of the things I think is super interesting, and there's a couple companies that support this really well, is sort of using the existing way that people judge information today, which is sort of social information, thumbs up and thumbs downs and all that stuff. So I am really intrigued by the notion that you should let grassroots best practices develop, but you need to put in a structure supported by a tool that evaluates those best practices. Because, and this is the snarky IT guy comment, right? Some people will think their report is better because it's color-coded in purple, and some will think it's better because it's colored in green. And the truth is they're not both right. So how do you want to architect for that balance between getting best practices to filter up and develop reporting that you as a person sitting in the ivory tower don't understand, but everyone else goes, I love this. This is awesome. And you want to make sure that that best practice spreads, but you don't want to make sure that it then becomes, a mushroom farm, as it were.
Well, as all vendors, and the industry just gets better at this. I mean, the rise of the data practitioner is a reality.
Yep. But
the flip side is, you've got to be that intermediary where not all of the data can flow that easily to everyone in the company, right? So it's a real balancing act, I guess, that you're in the mix of every day. So I commend how you get that done and how you ride that balancing act. Two quick questions, and then I think we'll wrap up if that's okay, Drew.
Absolutely.
One question I've got, you alluded on it at the cloud level where, hey, we're moving the majority of our stuff to the cloud. I think we enjoy the agility. We enjoy the integration. Clearly, our ability to get to predictive models quickly, easily, and effectively, that's what the cloud brings to you. But some of that stuff may journey backwards. You alluded to cost. Right. And as much as, you are typically CDOs that I talk to are really put into the position to drive the business. But every now and then, right, they get but let's drive it with some element of cost constraints. Are any cost constraints being put on you at this stage of your journey with the firm? Or do you think that they may come in, 2022 or 2023?
I mean, we have cost constraints in the way that everybody has cost constraints in terms of we are building up our organization and I'm hiring a lot of people, but I'm not hiring an infinite number of people for an unbounded salary. Because in data analytics, those costs are real. I mean, the cloud costs can get big fast, but some of that cloud cost is operational data, right? It's to make pizzas and take money for making pizzas. So that will never, ever be sacrificed. We will always make a good pizza and get paid for it. But what I would say is a little bit to poke back at your question and go all the way back to the beginning, right? We talked about the CDO as a title. It could be because I was raised in IKEA, which is a very cost-conscious company. But if I have anything like a VP or C in my title, I don't need people to tell me that my responsibility is to control costs.
Yep.
My responsibility is to ensure that I grow the business in a cost-effective way. And what I recognize, and it's only a theoretical recognition, but I go talk to my geeks. I love my geeks. I talk to people who are more experienced than I and people who may be further down the road. And I also talk to people who are maybe thought leaders in this space. And they say, look, it's not out of the realm of real that you would, if you ran a near real-time application in every one of your stores that had a certain amount of data, you would start to get to a point where you would have to ask yourself, even if it's a decent return on investment now, that the cloud costs could exceed. And what if at that point, not too many what ifs here, but what if at that point you've created a tool that's really valuable for the store? It enables them to, I don't know, make less dough. Just a stupid statement, right? But the thing you eat, not the money you count, but make less dough.
Mm-hmm.
And they became really enamored with that. Would you want to shut it down for cost? No, you would probably want to find a new cost-effective solution. And that cost-effective solution might mean going anti-paradoxical and routing it over back onto an on-prem. Yeah. If at that point, by the way, this is the other thing that's super fascinating about this industry, right? If at that point we haven't found a different pricing model for cloud, or if at that point we haven't found a new way to compress data, or if at that point we haven't found a new way to send analytics that's less expensive. So, but regardless, I'm always going to ask myself, is this a cost which is worth it for the company to incur? Mm-hmm. And if I am the driver of that cost, I'm going to hold myself accountable to that cost, hopefully before anybody comes and tells me I should, because if that's the case, then I think maybe I haven't lived up to my title.
Yeah, no, great comments. Yeah, we definitely are seeing, things that knee-jerk reaction migrate rapidly to the cloud, and others that are now gradually coming back. I've worked with some firms that have tremendous volume, like in the ad tech industry, where you just can't think about moving that stuff to the cloud. You just cannot, with the pricing concessions and cost per ad impression that are drawn into that equation. It just does not make sense. The flip side is you want to take advantage of the agility and all those great tools that are out there in the cloud. So it's back to that balancing act. So
exactly. And I think to your point, since agility is the starting point, you use that agility until you've become to something that's quite regular, right? Once you get to programmatic ad spend and you've sort of fine-tuned the features and fine-tuned everything else, why would you not just implement it in a much more static system? Because it was the agility to create it that mattered, and the agility to run it isn't as important.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, so if you're comfortable, I know you have to be cautious because you work in a privately held company, and this is not public knowledge, but in your role, what do you feel, whether it's a past life or currently in your new endeavor 5 months in, but what's been one of the most meaningful wins that your firm's been able to achieve in terms of winning with data?
That's a super good question. I'll answer it actually, which I don't think it has anything to do with me, but I was in a meeting where we had a key metric that we were tracking. This is my current employer. We had a key metric that we were tracking, and there was a sort of just a software problem that wasn't easy to find, but it was found because the metric started to drift. And everyone got freaked out in the meeting because they're like, oh my God, everyone's going to be so angry at us and it's horrible. And what should we do? And what I thought was really interesting was that people said, I'm really upset. I don't have this metric. I really depend on this metric. And when can you get it? And then when we gave them a good reason that was somewhat complex, they said, okay, thank you. We understand. But you say you'll have it at this time, so I will find another way to manage my business. And why I say that's a win is it was a really good conversation around the importance of the metric, which we thought was kind of important, but we didn't know people were really loving it. And it was also a really good conversation because people who don't have IT backgrounds respected the group and said, okay, if you guys say you've tried your best and it just didn't work, we'll figure it out. So the reason I call that a win is that data analytics products, if you want to use that term, are really complex and things can go wrong. And if you get yourself into an environment where you're just finger pointing, then it's all going to bog down and it's going to be terrible. And there's almost no getting out from that. So if you are in an environment, which I am happy to be in, where you can have a calm discussion with people in your company family, we think of ourselves as a family, and get angry with each other, get disappointed with each other, which is fine, but say, okay, we're going to work this out together. And in the meantime, I'll figure it out without much drama. I think that's a really good win. And then the other win that I would say, which is a little bit more straightforward, is, at a previous employer, we had a process which was really, really manual to balance supply and demand, especially on products which were outgoing and they were end of life. And we built a really sophisticated tool to do this. And then we had a very junior member of the team sort of point out that there's like 3 people in the company that can manage this tool, and there's 80 people in the company that manage this process. So we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And everyone from the senior data scientist in that room said, yeah, you're right. So let's redesign. So the win there is a recognition to me that it's not the most sophisticated or complex algorithm that wins. It's the one that meets the user and drives the value. And so the win there really flipped our switch from a sort of let's do the coolest thing, the biggest thing, to let's do the most effective thing. Yeah. And like those two are rarely the same. And
I think if you can find, as an example, a data scientist that can kind of leave academia behind, they're not, sitting for their PhD thesis, but they're trying to drive the business at Little Caesars. And if you can find that person, obviously they're worth their weight in gold, because they're smart, but yet they're riding that balancing act just as you are, right, to figure out what's going to be effective. And they're not easy to come by, right? A lot of people still want to build cool stuff for the sake of building cool stuff. But if it doesn't translate to that KPI, to growing the business, to improving things, you could argue, was it really effective?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the greatest underappreciated assets for a data scientist, we had a couple at IKEA and we have a brilliant one here at Little Caesars, is creativity. It's like, it comes like 10th in the list of things when you read what should be, but no, it's like number 1 or number 2, because they live in reality. They meet people who don't understand what they understand. They live in a data reality where the thing they want isn't the thing they can get. They live in, as we talked about earlier, a compute reality, which is where infinite compute is infinitely expensive. So if you don't have people who are creative to solve those problems, I don't know how they get it done.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Drew, we cannot thank you enough for spending this hour with us. This was extremely insightful. You've drawn me closer into the challenges that CDOs, but I think the gains that CDOs can realistically accomplish. So thank you for your time today. For those of you that are listening, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. We have some great ones out there. I think many, many people will enjoy listening to. Thank you.
Thanks, David.